Okay, in this video, we continue looking at absolute and relative referencing. So what we have here is we have sales per month, so sales from January to December, and let's assume we already have these sales in here for the 2021 year. And now we want to basically forecast each year. So in 2022, we say that there'll be a 5% growth on the 2021 numbers. And then when we come to 2023, we say there's assuming a 6% growth on the 22 numbers and so forth. So 2024 has 8%. And obviously we could change this. I mean, if we wanted to make that 10%, we obviously would want any formulas then to basically change based on whatever percentages we enter in for the growth. All right, so in a previous video, we know that if I set equals to that, right, and I want to work out what is 5%, I would put in that over there. And that would be the 5% of 341 to 50, which is B7, just going again, it's that number times the 5%, and then I add on the initial amount, right, to show the full growth. So 5% plus what is already there in 2021. So on a 5% growth level, that would work out to 43,313. And obviously, if I change this to 8%, for example, you can see that number changes. Now, we know that if the way it currently is set up, if I drag this down, it's not going to work again, because say, for example, if I go here, it's now actually each cell that goes down, it's actually not referring to that same 8%. So in the previous video, if I go to F2 over here, we know that if we went onto that C3, which is this one over here, we would need to press F4 to make it an absolute reference, which I've done now. Now I'm going to click here and drag this all the way down, and you can see it's all fine. If I go here, for example, and I press F2, it's still basically taking that number and multiplying it by the absolute reference C3, which is the 8%. Now, obviously, once we do one formula in here, the ideal is we should be able to copy it across the whole sheet, right? So what I should be able to do is literally, if I, for example, highlighted this whole row, right, whatever formulas are in here, if I click and hold and drag it across, it'll copy those formulas into all of the other cells, as you can see. So for example, and in fact, we can just do one. I'm going to press the Control Z to undo. So let's just say, for example, I took and I initially copied just that formula and I pasted it over there. Right. Now, if I go into the F2, however, instead of actually taking that number and going by the 6%, it's still stuck on the 8%. Right. And this is now where you'll begin to understand what we mean by changing the relative referencing. You see, when you actually put a dollar in front of the C, it means that wherever you copy it across, right, in this initial one, when we put in here to say it's $C, it means that even if we copy to any other column, it will still refer to column C. But in this case, if you think about it, when we copy to the other columns, we want the column to change, all right? But at the same time, the $3 means that it'll always refer to row 3. So when we copy down, for example, we still want to refer to row 3, but we don't necessarily, want to change. We want to be able to change the columns, but we don't want to change the row. We always want this formula to refer to row 3. So what I could have actually done is if I remove that C3, right, and I copy this down in here, let's say we copy it all down, you'll see it'll basically make no difference to the numbers, but it's still keeping, the C doesn't have a dollar in front of it, and it'll keep it as C in this column, but the 3 will remain constant. So this will still work in that it'll always stay constant on column C. Now, how this is different though is when you copy it to a different column. So if I copy this now with no dollar in front of the C, but the dollar in front of the 3, and I paste it, right, you can see that the 3 still remains there, but now because there was no dollar in front of the C here, so the C wasn't basically an absolute reference, it will change the column as I copy this formula across. So what will happen is, let's say we drag this down. If I just double click on it to copy down, it'll still all remain referring to row 3, but now it's all column D. Now the advantage, this formula, if you think about it now, can be copied across all of these formulas. Let's say we paste it over there. And every single one of them, when it gets copied to column E, the column D here, right, gets changed to E, because the column itself doesn't have a dollar sign in front of it. So as you copy it across different columns, it will change. However, it doesn't matter where you copy this formula to, it'll always refer to row 3 because the row 3 has the dollar sign in front of it. So the row 3 remains constant. Doesn't matter where you copy the formula, it'll always stay as 3, even though you're copying it across different rows. So take a minute to think about that, and hopefully you get the understanding. And obviously, as you work through some examples of your own, this will become a lot more clearer. So the key point of this is that wherever the dollar sign, you can actually also have a scenario, which is obviously not shown here, where you can have a dollar sign in front of the column letter. So you could have, for example, $C, right? And nothing 3. Then it would change the row as you copied across, but it will always keep the column on C. Didn't matter where you, it doesn't matter actually then where you copied. So you can basically make either the column or the row an absolute reference, which means that as you copy it, it doesn't change, or you can actually make both of them. Or in the normal default situation, neither of them are constant. So normally, as we shown, when you copy a formula, it will change basically, the relative, it's relative to that spot. So it'll go, if it was 2 rows up and 1 row and 1 column to the left, it'll always maintain that same pattern if there's no dollar signs in here at all, which is referred to as the relative referencing.